Okay, let's go ahead and get started. My name is Peter Rumsey, and I'm the founder of the Stanford Building Decarbonization Learning Accelerator. And if you are not familiar with us, we're a project of creating teaching material for college and university professors to incorporate building decarbonization into their courses. We also do collaborate with and have lots of folks that are users of our material from the private sector. Today, we've got a really exciting webinar, and we do monthly webinars. This is the last one of the academic year, 2023-24, and we're going to take a break during the summer and then restart up the webinars in September. So with that, I'll jump right in. Today, we're discussing boosting energy autonomy through decarbonization. And we have a guest speaker named Stephone Coward. And I'm going to do a quick introduction and then hand it over to him. So Stephone is the Economic Justice Paid in Full campaign director at the Hip Hop Caucus, where he implements economic strategies that direct money away from the fossil fuel industry and mass incarceration into empowering solutions for local economies. After 2 decades of working in the banking industry in Dallas-Fort Worth, in 2016, he founded Bank Black USA and the nonprofit Cowrie initiative that supports minority depository institutions. In 2021, he was named one of Forbes' Next 1,000 as a social entrepreneur and became a Just Economy Institute Fellow, joining a growing movement of financial activists who are shifting the flow of capital and power to support the well-being of all people and the planet. So there's a lot there. I'll leave it to Stephone to maybe explain a little bit about the Hip Hop Caucus and then obviously the work that he's doing and share that with you today. Stephone?
Thank you for having me in this space. And so what I'll do is I will bring up the slides as I start speaking. And here we go. So again, thank you all for allowing me to be in this space with you to talk about the work that we do here at the Hip Hop Caucus and how we can how can we pull on the different financial levers of power to be able to create change in our communities. And so that's part of what I'll be discussing today. And so I'll share a little bit about what we're kind of going over. So we'll have the vision. We want to really dig into just transition. Some people may not be familiar with that word, or those who are, like, sometimes it can come across as a catch-all word, right? And like, so let's talk about what it actually means and how is it leveraged to be able to create and build a future that is Black and green. And so with that, I will talk a little bit about Hip Hop Caucus. So Hip Hop Caucus is a organization that has been around for 20 years this September. We're a nonprofit, we're nonpartisan, and our goal is to do work that is intersectional. As you can see, we have our 4 different platforms. Our Respect Our Vote platform that's focused on strengthening democracy. We have our Think 100 platform that's focusing on climate change and environmental justice. We're really advocating for those who are first and worst impacted by the harms of these industries, these extractive industries. We have our Civil and Human Rights Department called Good Trouble, to where we from police violence to criminal justice, we have platforms that are uplifting racial justice and advocating for the rights of our people. And then you have my platform, Justice Paid in Full. And so Justice Paid in Full, we're advocating for an economy that works for everybody. We're talking about how do we create a system that does not prioritize profit over people, because I feel like the financial industry right now is about, managing risk and doing what has worked for them in the past. Unfortunately, that's not what's going to continue to work for us in the future. And so we have to be able to transition, have broader ideas. And so like I said, like when it comes to the Hip Hop Caucus, all our work is intersectional. Our goal was to create a sustainable institution to where that will connect, starting with the hip hop culture, the community, from grassroots to celebrities to the political process. And we've been working to fulfill that dream ever since. And so I'll talk to you about the work that I do more specifically within the Justice Paid in Full platform. I lead a campaign called Bank Black and Green. And the purpose of this campaign is to be able to invest in the future. We want to strengthen the power of Black institutions, and so they can be able to flow capital to frontline communities of color, and with the goal of reducing economic disparities, and the extractive industries that harm our community. Our goal is to be able to, and when I say the word extractive, let me just, because I may use it a couple of times in this conversation. When we're talking about extractive, we are talking about communities that take from us, that prioritize profit, that pull from the land, pull from the communities without giving back. And like this form has come from when you think about agriculture, when you farm and you're planting, you like there's these rules that we live by. Like when you suck out the nutrients from the community, from the soil, you can't just continue to replant. You have to pour back into it to make it continue to be strong. And so that is, well, so when we're talking about, we see the economic system in the same way, being extractive. And so like there's something called regenerative farming, to where like you're making sure the way that you plant and do things is pouring back into the soil. We also take that same framework when it comes to the economy. We want to create a regenerative economy where systems of power are pouring back into the people as well. And so we can grow things like what you see on the screen right now, right? Like, so you like, a couple of the slides, right? Like when people talking about what does the future look like, that is like investing in renewables, that is caring about the communities. And you have all these different artworks, like representations. And I got this one from one of the universities, Tennessee State. Like you had these pictures out here, and they're saying like, what does tomorrow look like? It could look like this, right? And like to some people, you're like, well, like, that's a lot of green, and like, you know, in some movies it looks apocalyptic, right? Like a community that has, you know, been run down. But this is an example of how we can do business in a way that does not compromise the ability of the next generation to do the same. We can do business in a way to where we're in harmony with the environment and not acting as a foe or adversary of it. So that's on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side, you have different pictures, right? The first two pictures are the city of Portland, who has been doing a lot of sustainable infrastructure, where they're having the urban roofs, and they're making sure that they're the way that they stopping heat islands. The second picture is talking about like our energy system, which we'll get into more, you know, later into the presentation. But how are you using solar to be able to power your neighborhoods and commercial buildings as well? And the last picture I thought was pretty cool, because this is at Tennessee State University. It's a group of students who are working on decarbonization work, and they're being out in the field. And so I thought that was something pretty interesting to share with you all. So our goal is to create communities that are safe, healthy, and vibrant. Like, so I'll talk to you a little bit more about that. But like, I came across this poem, right? And it really resonated with me, because when we do the work that we do, we are trying to break free from the hard concrete world that the current economic system has created. And so this was a poem by Tupac before he became famous, and it was talking about, like, did you hear about the roads that grew from concrete? proving nature's laws wrong, it learned to walk without having feet. Funny it seems, but by keeping its dream, it learned to breathe fresh air. Long live the rose that grew from the concrete when no one cared. And for me, that resonates to this just transition that we're getting ready to talk about, that we are wanting to create a new system. And this system is going to rise out of the concrete. And there's a couple of different plays on words. We live in communities that are heat islands, to where it's there's no natural vegetation. And these communities are hotter. They're less habitable. Your communities that and we can talk about Black and brown communities, to where you've had policy that has built highways through them to where they're not livable, like fossil fuel groups that have implanted themselves into these communities. And so to build something new, I look at it as the rose that grew from concrete. And so that was like just something I wanted to share with everybody. Going to the next slide, this is the just transition framework that we've talked about, right? And so this just transition framework was created by the Climate Justice Alliance. It's a group of indigenous led leaders that are using the practices that they have grown with to be able to say, how do we live in harmony? And what I'll do over the next couple of slides is go into detail about the work that we're doing, how it fits, and what does it look like, right? So I told you a little bit about the extractive economy that decreases wealth and power and consolidates it to where a few that focuses on militarism, the police state. It when it comes to like disposing of waste, it does not care where it's at. And it usually it's going to be in low income communities, communities that have been divested from. And so it prioritizes profit over all, consumerism, to where it's just let's turn the next dollar no matter what it takes. And so this just transition framework wants to move from that to the regenerative. And the part in the middle that you see, that is the just transition. How do we stop the bad and build the new? How do we change the rules, whether it's internationally, like we're even seeing how I think the UN Secretary Chief was saying when it came to fossil fuels, like that we have to end the commercials, like that prioritize and uplift the fossil industry like it's doing well in the same way that they've done with smoking. And so like because it's a risk. So like you may see that in the news, they were just talking about it this past Sunday that he made that announcement. And so we hope things like that catch on policies. How do we divest from the powers at the stop and redeploy that power, those resources, investing into our community? And so you look at this just transition as like a filter, like I'll say a Brita filter, right? Like like moving, like getting all the toxins out and creating something new, to where we're talking about a regenerative economy that focuses on people, that understands that, again, like I was saying earlier, that people and profit don't have to be mutually exclusive, right? Like you can do both. We have to do both, right? And so prioritizing care, the planet, the democracy when it's supposed to be working, like, empowering all people, just not the well-connected. And so this is the world that we want to go into, and how we want to take financial institutions into this world. And so what I'll do is talk about that a little bit more through the framework of what we do here with Bank Black and Green. And I'm going to give you examples of people who are actually at these all different little pieces, coming together in their separate ways to do something greater as a collective, right? So we talk about like there's a confluence of movements happening. Stop the Money Pipeline is an incredible organization that has been doing the work to be able to stop the growth of fossil fuel financing, putting pressure on the larger institutions to say that enough is enough. Like we can't, you cannot continue to give loans banking these industries that are tearing our planet apart. And so they're doing that work to stop the bad. And then you have incredible organizations like Beneficial State Foundation that are working to build the new. And when we're talking about building the new, they created this framework called the Equitable Banking Standards, which I love. And right, and so their purpose is to be able to give the current financial system a roadmap forward about how do financial institutions do better, right? Because one of the things that I did not mention earlier when we were talking about the framework, we have to remind these financial institutions that they have a social license to operate, and they're operating at the will of the people as long as the people allow it. And so as a growing number of people are caring to be able to be more conscious of their spending, more conscious of where their money is held, like these financial institutions could go the way of Polaroid, right? Like they can lose their viability and they can lose their social license to operate. And that is the goal of a growing body of groups of people like Stop the Money Pipeline and other on the ground organizers who are trying to get change. One more thing that I'll tell you about the equitable banking standards is that like as you see the different structures of all the different areas that they hit on, but the goal is to be able to like tell bankers, give them an example of how to be environmental, socially conscious institutions, right? Allowing them to be a leader because you have policies that are essential, policies that are like pushing the needle and like being emerging of like that's something that's like not being done as often. And then you have these ambitious policies of saying here's how you be an industry leader and truly affect change. And so it gives all the financial institutions opportunity to say where they want to get on at. The advocates, this is a tool to allow people to say like how banking impacts your missions and your goal. How, like, what can you do? And policymakers can be able to use this to be able to shape fair financial regulations that help others. And of course, they're like us, the customers, right? We can use these standards to measure how our financial institutions, where we have our money, are. Asking them, have they adopted standards like these? Otherwise, we'll choose institutions who are doing better, right? And so the bottom half of that just transition, I want to talk about different groups of like, how do we create this change, right? You have this organization called Can-D Group. I love them. They support families, foundations, and investors who want to shift the flow of capital and to do just uh, impact investing, right? Like their theory of change is community wealth building, self-determination, climate resilience. It says that it requires facilitation of capital flow. So the money that's being held is being redeployed. And so I'll share this little a stat. There are impact investors, and when I say impact investors, I mean philanthropic organizations, high net worth individuals, corporations who have dedicated over $1 trillion of resources to building this new, just regenerative economy. And so they pledged these resources, and our goal is to be able to help give them places to be able to move those funds so we can create the new. So Can-D Group is one of those organizations who helps rally these impact investors to do just that. And so when we look at the value filters, this is where Bank Black and Green comes back in. Like we have a framework that we've set up to say like, here's how you can invest in the public health and safety of our communities, right? We're talking about how we can raise the bar on climate financing for these financial institutions and getting them to do better. Um, Going into Adesina Capital, Adesina Capital is a fantastic social impact organization that they created something called the social justice investment criteria. It's like a data set driven with standards that guide impact investors strategies, right? So you see all these organizations, they're working in separate ways, they're more familiar. Our goal is to be able to say, how do we connect all the pieces together to be able to do this change? And so with that, here comes Bank Black and Green. Bank Black and Green is this multi-year campaign that we see leveraging Black-owned banks to be a part of the solution, to be able to create this new system that we want to see. What we do is we rally those impact investors that I was speaking about earlier to be able to shift the flow of capital to banks who sign a pledge to say that they will not be a part of financing these harmful industries. And what they will do instead is to invest in climate finance, giving community developers, builders, different people the resources and financial products to be able to create this new economy that we want to see, right? We want these banks to redeploy that capital into green capital, right? And so this campaign is really rooted in understanding that economic justice, racial justice, gender justice, climate and environmental justice, they're all linked, right? When we do this work. And so we see that if you're working towards advancing any of these goals, we're all working together for the same good. We want to be able to remind people that we're all in this together. And what we see us at the Hip Hop Caucus, we see Black banks in financing decarbonization projects. We see them being on the front line of that because these banks are usually community and regionally located. And so and they're investing in communities to where the big financial institutions have divested from, because big banks currently still are all about, profit, a return on investment. And we've seen these larger institutions pull out of communities and because they did not see them as profitable. Right. There's so many different reasons why we can say that that they're not profitable. Right. You can talk about like the federal policy that has made communities like that. You can talk about the predatory loan centers that are going into these communities. There's a variety of things that we can discuss about why that, but the banks chose to say that we're going to pull out. And so which leaves banking deserts, communities that do not have traditional banking services, and instead those payday loan centers that I was talking about, checking cashing places, pawn shops are taking their place, and it's not helpful for the community, extractive things. And so we want to be able to change that. And so just in case you were not aware what a Black-owned bank is, a Black-owned bank is a institution to where 51% of their stockholders are members or of a Black community. And this Black-owned banks sit in a broader set of financial institutions that we call minority-owned banks, minority depository institutions. These are women-owned banks. These are Asian American, Hispanic-owned banks, indigenous banks, communities that come together who may be deemed a minority status by the federal government. These groups of people have been building institutions because the larger set of institutions have not been a part of that. And the reason why we focus on them, like just talking a little bit about my work, like that myself and my co-founders did in 2016, was saying that we saw when people were caring about where their money goes, and they wanted to move them from the big institutions who are not caring. And then we started looking and we saw that there's something called, community and regional banks. And within there's this subset of institutions, those minority owned banks. And we saw that Black banks were dropping dramatically. There was over like 50 of them in year 2000, and when we started talking, there was barely 20 of them. And so we're like, we'll start there about lifting up these institutions who are disproportionately helping communities of color. And if we can send a sign that the work that what we do is that if these financial institutions can take a pledge like this to invest in the public health and safety of our communities, there is no reason why the larger financial institutions can't do the same, who is better capitalized, who has the ability to be able to push on different financial levers of power to be able to create change. And so we want to use this messaging, this framework as a rallying cry to get the larger financial institutions to explicitly start focusing on climate finance so we can build this future that we saw in the previous slides. And so the way that we see it just really quickly is saying that in phase one of the campaign, we're just asking institutions to say, you're not going to do any business with any more entities that uplift you're not going to bank any more institutions that put pressure on, like, that make mass incarceration and fossil fuel to continue to exist, right? And we see this as a phased approach, right? You have a set of impact investors who are excited about that. But you continue to get more people in, the more that you become industry leading. Phase two is saying that if you have these harmful loans in your portfolio, to create an extra strategy to be able to remove them out of your portfolio, to not bank them. My last job, I was a portfolio manager for Capital One, and our goal was to be able to manage the portfolio of high net worth individuals. So I worked in the private banking underwriting department. And what I learned from that experience is that this is possible, because if loans are not do not meet the goals of the larger financial institutions, they're set aside into something called special assets. So, we have the larger financial institutions say, oh no, we can't do this. You actually can. It's a done practice that happens all the time. So we're asking you to engage in that. And then the goal where we feel like more impact investors will come is when you no longer do business with anybody else who does business with those. And not everybody's able to do that for a variety of reasons. But this is the North Star, to be able to have that moral authority about how do we move forward and create this new economy that works for everybody. And so this past March, I had an opportunity with my colleagues and I to launch Bank Black and Green in Dallas-Fort Worth. And so I want to show you a quick 1-minute video of what was created there.
The time has come for us to be prepared so we can have resources, we can create wealth, we can help our community to live longer, to do better, to do what needs to be done so they can survive.
Black banks were born out of racism. You have over a century of data that shows indeed these banks still matter.
We need to hold our banks and bankers accountable to help us create a financial strategy. My money is here. This is my current state. This is my future state. You show me how to do it.
I believe in banking in Black because we know that in a capitalistic society, money is oxygen. And the more we're able to galvanize that oxygen, the more we're capable of empowering the communities that we care about.
Happy 20th anniversary.
Happy 20th anniversary.
Happy 20th anniversary
To the Hip Hop Caucus. To the Hip Hop Caucus. To the Hip Hop Caucus. Thanks for the empowerment you're bringing to our communities.
And so that is a video of what the campaign is all about. And so going into this next part of the presentation, I want to talk to you about, you saw the ingredients, each of them, and we're going to talk about how you bring these ingredients together to make a gumbo that is going to be able to shift the flow of capital and build a future that is Black and green. And so with that, I will move to the next set of slides. So when when we're talking about shifting the flow of capital to these financial institutions, like we're talking about the different organizations who are doing so. So when we're talking about shifting the flow of capital, there's organizations out there who are doing this work, who are trying to change the rules to make sure that all communities have access to these new resources that will be flowing. This group that I'm talking about right now and throughout this presentation is called the Community Builders of Color Coalition. It's 19 BIPOC organizations that are urging the EPA to be able to leverage the Inflation Reduction Act. This was something that passed in 2022 to be able to create a new program called the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Funding. There's a pot of capital that's going to be explicitly for the purposes of helping disadvantaged communities. And so several organizations like the National Bankers Association, the African American Alliance of CDFI CEOs, ourselves are looking to say, how can we ensure that the pot of funds, the resources actually goes to communities who are in need and not just to the larger groups that are the most popular. If you remember when it came to the PPP funding that happened, you saw how when that pot of resources became available, all the people who are well to do these organizations got access to it first. And it did not trickle to, like, with this whole thought of trickle down economics, we saw it did not work. It went to the people who had the resources and they did not do anything with it to be able to advance at large, did not do anything with it to advance the lives of all people who were most harmed during the pandemic. And so these organizations are coming together to be able to leverage that funding. That the greenhouse gas has like over $20 billion in grants that they're doing to reduce climate and air pollution, deliver benefits, mobilize capital to be able to create change that is investing in clean, green infrastructure, right? The work that we're all doing. And when you need that infrastructure, like they created an organization called the Justice Climate Fund, which I'll let the video do the talking about what they do. And the organizations that I was just showing you on the previous slide are part of creating this climate fund to be able to make a difference. So yes, that is a little bit about the Justice Climate Fund. And what the purpose of this fund is, it's a nonprofit fund to redeploy the capital that is coming from that like the Inflation Reduction Act funding, that greenhouse gas funding, to redeploy that capital to community development financial institutions, to credit unions, to minority depository institutions and green banks, in order to be able to enable families and communities to be able to invest in a greener and safer future. And so one of our goals and responsibilities are to be able to explain why climate finance is important for these community lenders, right? And so RMI, National Bankers Association, and Hip Hop Caucus, we did a white paper to be able to talk about unlocking this new era of climate finance. And you can be able to find it by just Googling Hip Hop Caucus, National Bankers, and RMI, and I can make sure that we share this white paper that we did. And here are some of the bullet points. We want community lenders to be able to care about climate lending because it affects the effects of climate change disproportionately impact, the primary communities that these mission-driven organizations serve, right? We know that redlining and all these other harmful things that have happened have impacted our, these communities the most. And we want to be able to give these financial institutions a new way forward to be able to invest in our communities. What I'm sharing right here, when we're talking about building a future that is both Black and green, we are talking about, again, investing in the public health and safety of BIPOC communities by flowing capital. And these two slides, I feel like were a great way to be able to share how that work is being done. You have on the left-hand side, the Justice Climate Fund is already doing projects all across the country to get people and getting that green capital out there to developers and institutions who want to do energy retrofits and to change our community for the better. And so you're seeing where they're all at across the country. And this is just like, this slide was actually maybe from less than a year ago. Like, it's increased tremendously since then. And on the right, you see the U.S. Department of Industry, when they're talking about all the different fundings, one of the mechanisms is to make sure that universities are being a part of this and teaching that. You see there with these two slides, there's a lot of overlap in the states where this work is going on. So we're connecting financial institutions and educational institutions together to be able to invest in our communities. And so, as you can see, the pieces are coming together about how we do this work that we're doing. And so, drilling down a little bit more to one of the groups who are part of this community of Colors Coalition Building is the National Bankers Association. They have a foundation. This is the home of all minority institutions, like I was saying earlier. Amazing gentleman named Christopher White. He's the deputy director of this organization, and he's talking about how these minority-owned banks have issued more than 270,000 in loans, and how the communities that they go to. But he's also speaking about there's an opportunity that the MDIs who are part of these networks have over $45 billion in small multifamily properties in their portfolio that are in need of retrofits. These could be housing, these can be commercial buildings, like there's so many different things that are available, and that giving communities an opportunity to see what decarbonization projects look like. Like, the solar, the green roofs, the urban spaces, the urban greening spaces, the parks. How do we create like a cooler neighborhoods in terms of temperature, right? And so just alone with this organization who has this amount in properties, they're looking to see how do we show the community that. We talk about decarbonizing buildings, right? And there's a stat that said that there's an estimate of $10 trillion by 2015 to decarbonize the United States. And so, like, a couple of things that we wanted to talk about is like, why is this a good thing? We know we need to have this is our planet, and we need to make sure that people can live on it, and that we need to shift the flow of way we're doing things. We need to help educate business owners that this makes good business sense. I remember when I was in grad school, we talked about projects like this in one of our classes, and talking about return on investments, right? Some in the past, at least at a minimum of 10 years ago, that it was really expensive to do these types of projects, and people were saying, and so that was a way that discouraged people from investing in these projects, because they said that the profit that you can make does not come quick enough. And so one of the things that what we're seeing now is as you are starting to get more financial institutions into this space, then we're the goal is to be able to see the cost lower because it's becoming more widely popular to where we can get more people to engage in these types of projects because the time is now. I'll give you a personal example, right? I live here in Dallas, Fort Worth. I live in Texas. Texas is not a part of the larger grid that we have, right? And so some people like cheer that on, but my family saw that in February that winter grid fail, like losing our groceries. That's putting strains on other communities who may not who have to buy new things to replace that. That wasn't accounting for that. And this grid resulted in the death of 57 people across 25 counties in February alone, costing over 195 billion in damage. And this is a stat given by the University of Texas at Austin Energy Institute. We can't have that happen again. Recently, because of the bad weather that we had here, we saw a lot of people lose their power. This was about 2 weeks ago. The grid failed again. And what happened is like right after we had these storms, because we're in the summer, we got record heat. And so you're having people without power who are now having to deal with the heat and cannot use their air conditioning. Not only you're losing your groceries, you may lose your life. And so we need to be able to think about what is the alternative. And Texas has an opportunity to be able to invest in it. We're one of the largest states. I believe we're number 2, on size. And we have the ability to be able to do more than what's being done. There are a lot of wind turbines here, and there are a lot of solar stuff there, but communicating that to the masses and getting more people to be aware of that, Texas still has work to do, and we're hoping to be a part of creating that change. Going even further into this, we've talked about these organizations who are coming together, leveraging the resources made available by that greenhouse gas reduction funding, and the financial institutions who are leveraging that funding to redeploy capital into the communities that focus on retrofit. This is an example of one. In Maryland, a bank, one of the minority-owned banks, had redid a retrofit on this apartment building to be able to take advantage of energy efficiency. And so this condo, as you see here, is saying that they're now saving over $75,000 a year on energy costs, right? And so these are small examples of different projects happening. We want to have more Tacoma parks. We want to have more communities that are able to decrease the amount of carbon that they're outputting. Here's a way that I think that we can talk about it, right? And this is through a framework of understanding Black common spaces, community land trusts, and cooperatives. Professor Kofi Boone, who you see on the left, he and another professor argued this idea of talking about something called the Black Commons. And this is, Black Commons are historically marginalized and underserved communities that are facing multiple challenges at once: a climate crisis, a health crisis, racial equity, and all these inequities together. And so the solution to this is to be able to pool collective land and resources to stabilize these communities. And you're starting to see these groupings of people coming together and buying their land to where it's theirs for them to have the ability to build on it in a way that is helpful for themselves. Like Professor Boone, he talks about recognition, reconciliation, and reparations. He was like, recognition is recognizing and respecting another human and their status and their rights. Reconciliation, acknowledging the responsibilities and harm that is, and accelerating this healing. And reparations, restoring and sustaining the capability of life to live a fulfilling life. And so this is the framework in which he approaches this work. He's a professor at North Carolina State University, a professor of architecture as well. And so he gave a talk recently talking about how we move forward with this work. And so when we talk about community land trusts, we're talking about, these are nonprofit institutions, well, organizations that are governed by a board of community land trust residents and public representatives to provide lasting community assets and shared equity of home ownership. So these groups of people, they buy this land and they make sure that it stays within the community and that are not owned by entities who may be choosing profit and turning these spaces into parking lots, or removing the green space. Like, this framework allows us to be able to really leverage this conversation about how can we focus on these decarbonization projects, and community land trust is a way to go about it. If you look at the bottom right, this community, and I believe this is Seattle, they on the community land trust is called Africatown. Africatown Community Land Trust was created as a way to be able to respond and repair the damages that were done to an African American community in Seattle, Washington. Gentrification caused this tech boom and forced many of the community residents to be able to be dispersed into different areas of the metropolitan. So this land trust was formed to acquire, steward, and develop land assets to be able to grow and create a thriving place within the central district and support other individuals. And so they took an old building, this Liberty Bank was considered the oldest Black-owned bank to the west of the Mississippi. And so they retrofitted this building to focus on energy efficiency, making sure that it's the output that is giving is sustainable. And so this is an example of how you can leverage these land trusts to be able to build proper things that are caring for our environment. The last thing on this is saying that there's an example at the top right, Green the Church. There's a movement of saying, how do we leverage cooperatives, these organizations who were built by people, are and governed by people, to be able to have a sustainable business. Green the Church, they have been going to Black communities and putting solar, doing other retrofits into these communities. They're giving the community an example of what solar could look like. We know that the church in many communities is a place where people congregate. And so by greening these buildings, you're giving people an example of what could be. And so I really love seeing that, because this picture at the top, this church was able to save over $285,000 on their electric bill. They're projected to save this much over the next 10 years. We know that the church are governed by their tithes and offerings. And so to be able to have something that allows you to free up those resources to where you can give back into the community, that I think that's just a really fantastic example of the work that we're doing. And so I leave you with this quote where we're talking about economic justice, right? I thought that this was a pretty powerful saying, because when people think of MLK, they only think about the peace part, and which he was, but he also was a person who was talking about, how do we move forward? How do we create a society to where we have political power and economic power? And so I always thought that this was a very interesting quote to be able to leave people with. And with that, I thank you for your time, and I'm here for any questions that you may have.
Great, Stephone. Thank you so much. A lot of good food for thought. One of them that you said that I really liked is that the expected cost of decarbonizing the economy would be $10 trillion by 2050. In the building sector, there's a huge amount of investment that's going on now, but is also going to start to accelerate. When we talk about making buildings more energy efficient, there's a huge economy in that. Lots of business opportunity, investment opportunities, electrifying buildings using heat pumps for domestic hot water and space heating, and then connecting buildings to renewable energy, either on the roof or off-site. This is one of the things that I think people don't talk about enough is the economic opportunity that's in front of us that is quite large. And ultimately, what we're trying to do here is show investments that are better than the fossil fuel investments that banks are accustomed to investing in. And it's not just the extraction, but also distribution of fossil fuels and everything, which are a growing liability and becoming more problematic as investments. And so what we're trying to show is there's something better. And while we're doing it, let's invest in black and green, right? So I think what you're saying resonates a lot with the work that we're doing on trying to, spread the word through educators about decarbonization is a big thing. It's going to
Yes.
transform how we think about buildings fundamentally. And we need to teach the next generation of college students about this, right? So anyway, with that, I would love if you would either like to put a question in the chat or raise your hand, and Lindsay will curate
Yeah, I
that.
already have one here.
Great.
From Charles. Excellent presentation. What are some workforce development opportunities for decarbonization? What are some careers should African Americans and others be focused on?
I appreciate that question. And so the way that I see it is that we should incorporate this in everything that we do, right? Like me, who was a person who came from the banking industry, I wasn't explicitly focused on this decarbonization work, right? I was a part of this culture just talking about finances. And so if you are a person who cares about like this planet that we live on, there's an opportunity in whatever work that you're currently doing right now to be able, like, not to even, you don't even have to leave if you don't want to this industry, and thinking about how the work that you do plays into this conversation, whether you're a community developer, whether you're a realtor, you're like, we're talking about, if you're in the medical field, you can be able to educate people on the harm that not decarbonizing is doing, and then giving them solutions from whatever sector that you're in. I guess like you can talk about like being a builder or doing construction. We have the workforce opportunities to be able to educate people in whatever sector that they are in. We have to hit this from every angle. So I would love to be able to keep in touch with you to learn more about what you're doing, because I believe, because I'm not sure what sector that you're in, but we can always tie it back to this work, because it needs people from every angle to go about that.
Here, go ahead, Lindsay. There's a question in chat.
Oh, it was just a response.
Oh.
Great answer. Every career can be a green or a decarbonization career. Thank you. I'm in green workforce development.
Let's keep in touch.
Yeah, one question that I had is, because a lot of the folks that we are working with are professors, and they're interacting with college students and such. What's your take on where young people are right now on this sustainability and green and careers and what they're concerned about?
That's a great question, because what I have seen with young people, these young people come into the space, they're very clear about the world that they want to live in. They like, especially this group of young people who had to survive through a pandemic, who have seen a lot of harm, who weren't able to graduate. They're seeing how policies are like enacted and how that is causing harm. They're very clear about how they feel morally on a lot of things. And even if you are a person who has done, like, you know, on the side of doing good, if you're, they have their North Star. And even like, and it's not enough just to say you're a part of it. They want you to be able to enact policies and create the change. They're not listening to the talking points that we've said in our lifetimes. It's not enough because they see that it doesn't work. They really believe in, like, you know, and I used this term earlier, this social license to operate. They are willing to forego certain things because they already feel like the economy or the society is, like, you know, not going in the right direction. So they don't have those emotional attachments that some of us may have. And they're like, we're all about the new and like moving forward. And so they're conscious about where they're spending. They're conscious about what their policy leaders are telling them, and they're standing up and making their voice heard. They're leveraging social media in a way to be able to do a lot of different creative things to be able to get their message out. And so what I say is that if financial institutions do not listen, and I'm just talking about the industry that I'm in right now, if they do not listen to these young people are saying what this tomorrow is, and leveraging those resources that are being created, like the equitable banking standards, these coalitions like Stop the Money Pipeline, there's going to be a problem on their hand. And when I say problem, I mean that you will see customers, they're going to be losing customers, and they're going to be creating their own. And so that's what I'm seeing for young people from today, being very clear about what they care about.
Oh, sorry.
Yep.
I was on mute. That's a fantastic way to end. I really appreciate that insight. I think that having somebody who's a national leader in this area with us today has just, you know, been fantastic to tie these things together. I do want to remind people that we've got lots of good content at our BDLA website that deals with environmental justice issues, as well as the fundamentals of things like heat pumps. So please do go to our BDLA website and download information, and encourage others to do the same. And we will be posting this video as well as others that we've done on our website, so you can see this or tell your friends about it later. I know I'll be telling lots of people about it. I think it was just a fantastic talk. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining. And Stephone, thank you.